Hello everybody, it is Nicole from iiKiui, and today we are back with part 2 of the last sketch with me. So let's not waste any time and hop right into the video. After completing the sketch, I take a picture of it on my iPad and adjust the contrast and brightness until it is close enough to a black line. I then set the layer to multiply and color it on another layer using grayscale to figure out my lights and darks. This helps me determine the contrast of the piece and how the overall color balance will look. When the grayscale is complete, I start adding colors with a similar saturation to them. For this piece, I wanted the color scheme to be more natural and muted, so I tried to avoid bright and bold colors and opted for more natural looking colors. I ended up using the complementary colors red and green, which I actually don't use that often. Once I figured out the color scheme, I then decided on the medium. I felt like this piece would look better in watercolor, but using watercolor pencils. First, I picked between a few different watercolor papers, and since I wanted to use watercolor pencils, I decided the Strathmore paper would be best because it was the smoothest out of the three that I was choosing from. The Arteza paper is more textured, so I felt like it would show too much of the colored pencil lines. I then taped the sketch onto the back of my paper using some dollar store masking tape because it sticks enough to keep it there, but not tight enough where it will rip the paper later. Then I traced the line art onto my watercolor paper using a few Prismacolor color erase pencils. Sometimes I'll use a regular mechanical pencil, but it all really depends on the medium I'm using. Since I've already decided on my color scheme, I just chose the color erase pencils that were similar to those colors so they wouldn't interfere with the painting process. After transferring the artwork onto the watercolor paper, I then start to choose colors within my art supplies that I can use for this drawing. For this process, I reference my swatch cards, which I'm planning on making a video going more in depth about them and how I make them so you guys can do it too. From my swatch cards, I can see which colors are the closest to the color scheme I chose, so I picked those out and set them aside. Before applying it to the artwork, I make sure to test out all of my chosen colors on a scrap piece of watercolor paper. When I cut down my papers, sometimes there's extra pieces, and I make sure to keep those for times like these. I also don't really want to waste good watercolor paper, so I like to keep it in a little bin. I'm basically testing out the colors to make sure that they look good together and are close to the colors that I want. After the long process of choosing and testing my colors, I apply the watercolor pencils to the drawing and color as I normally would. I have a video on how I use watercolor pencils, which I'll link in the description. Basically, I color very lightly first, and I use circular motions to prevent any hard lines from the pencils. If I want to add a gradient or shading, I gradually build up the color and pressure from the watercolor pencils. When the first layer of watercolor pencil is complete, I add the first wash of water to blend the colors together. This tends to lighten the color quite a bit, so after the layer is dried, I add more watercolor pencil in the areas that I think need darkening or definition. This process takes a while because I'm basically repeating it after each layer dries. I'm trying to slowly build up the color and shadows so I can get more definitive areas of light and dark. About halfway through the art piece, I found that the watercolor pencils weren't getting the colors as dark as I wanted, so it wasn't providing that contrast. I checked my art supplies and I found that the Arteza half pan colors would work well in this piece. I ended up mixing the red and red-brown together to create the hair shadow color I wanted, and for the horse's mane, I mixed their yellow ochre color with the dark brown and diluted it using a lot of water. The process repeats itself yet again until I'm happy with the buildup of color. After the main coloring was completed, I decided to bring out an old watercolor palette that I recently swatched in my notebook. This palette contains shimmery watercolors that I wanted to add to the piece to kind of make it feel magical. First, I added the muted green shimmer to her dress, but it did darken the dress and made it a shade darker than I wanted. Afterwards, I added the cream colored shimmer to the horse's mane because I wanted the horse to feel magical. Unfortunately, from straight on, you can't really tell that these shimmers are there, but if you look at it from an angle or in the light, then it does show the shimmer. One of the last things I do is I outline the entire piece. Today I'm using my zebra brush pen, which I'll link in the description along with all the other materials I've been using. I used to create the line art before coloring in the past, but there were too many accidents when it came to coloring with markers or watercolors. The pen would either smear or smudge or just blend in, and I always found that kind of disappointing. Nowadays, I switch the process around where I color first and line after. I've come to like this process better because not having the line art there also helps me see where I need to add more contrast or definition in my piece. This way, I'm not really relying on the line art to define the shapes for me. And the final addition to the piece is to add the highlights using a white gel pen. However, I did feel like it didn't really add much besides the eye shine and some highlights within the gold. Overall, I really like how this piece turned out, and I think I did a better job at creating a more realistic horse than I did over 10 years ago. I still love horses and I think they're beautiful, but I think I may be a little more biased nowadays towards bunnies. I hope you enjoyed the video and seeing a little more about my coloring process. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe and ring the bell so you're notified of when I post a new video. And if you have a subject that you drew often when you were younger, let me know in the comments. So with that, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today. Keep drawing, keep creating, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!